opportunities. And in this budget, we express our resolve to look forwards, not backwards, to embrace that change, to meet those challenges head on, and to seize those opportunities for Britain.
Well, I nearly put my Union Jack socks on. It was really upbeat, positive stuff, and certainly a style from Philip Hammond that I'd not seen really before. So what are the substance? Well, there's an extra £3 billion for Brexit preparations, although I have to say I've absolutely no idea what that's for. I hope it's not just for lots more civil servants. And no stamp duty for first-time buyers buying houses up to £300,000, an attempt to help the young get on the housing ladder. And a very ambitious house-building project, a hope that up to 300,000 extra houses can be built every year. More money for the NHS, although not quite as much as the NHS themselves perhaps had hoped for. But I have to say, when it came to the Office of Budget Responsibility, growth forecasts, they were pretty anemic and unexciting, talking about the economy growing at around about 1.5% for the next few years. And on the deficit, well, he claimed great credit that the deficit as a percentage of our gross domestic product would start to fall. But, you know, we should bear in mind that we are still borrowing £50 billion a year. That's the deficit. That gets added onto the debt. And it was the Tory government, or the Tory-led government, elected in 2010, that told us the books would be in balance by 2015. Now we're told they'll be in balance by 2025. So what did the leader of the opposition, Jeremy Corbyn, make of this budget?
The test of this budget has to be how it affects ordinary people's lives. And I believe as the days go ahead and this budget unravels, the reality will be a lot of people will be no better off, and the misery that many are in will be continuing. Pay, Mr. Speaker, is now lower than it was in 2010, and wages are now falling again. Economic growth in the first 3 quarters of this year is the lowest since 2009 and the slowest of the major economies in the G7. It's a record of failure with a forecast of more to come.
Well, that was a very shouty Jeremy Corbyn, a very angry Jeremy Corbyn, saying that things are bad and they will not get better. In fact, they're going to get a little bit worse. So I wonder, do you recognise Philip Hammond's economy that works for everyone, or Jeremy Corbyn's falling pay, slow growth and rising poverty? Which Britain, which vision do you recognise at this moment in time? Let me know what you think. If you think Corbyn's right, we're going down the tubes, it's bad for the poor, it's going to get worse, call me on 0345 6060 973, or if you think Hammond is right and things are getting better, text to 84850, or perhaps you feel neither of them are actually in touch portraying what's really going on out there, in which case you can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and you can watch me live on Facebook, and I'm currently in Austria. And I'm going to go straight to Tom in Ottershaw, a new caller to the show. Tom, good evening. What vision of Britain do you think is the right one?
Hi, good evening. Hi, good to speak to you. I was going back to your original comment about spreadsheet Phil, and the thing he should have spreadsheeted, and it's a very simple calculation, is the £40 billion ransom. That equates to £1,365 per taxpayer in the UK, which I don't think anyone really realises. Everyone talks about this big number with lots of zeros, but that's what they'd be reaching into your bank account for to pay them off.
Well, I guess the answer to that, Tom, is that if you drive a diesel motor car, your tax on that is going up. If you are a smoker and buy cigarettes, your tax is going up on that, way above the rate of inflation. So I guess smokers and drivers can say that they're actually paying these increased taxes today to get us ready for paying a big Brexit bill. I guess that's the answer, Tom. But you're right. He didn't, at any point in the budget, make reference to what could be, in the next year or two, a very big, if we believe them, one-off payment. Why do you think that was?
Because everyone's sweeping it under the carpet. It's a very, very large number that people view as kind of esoteric. Yet that's the fact. £1,365 a head per taxpayer.
No, listen, Tom, that's a great statistic, and that's one I think we should all keep in mind every time these negotiations are talked about. But maybe, as you say, it's being swept under the carpet. I mean, when would we pay this? I guess 2019? Or would they put it off until the end of the transition period? I'm not sure. Tom, you raise a really good point. The budget was pretty short in every way on what potentially could be a huge, huge bill. Tom, I thank you very much indeed for your call. Gordon is calling me from Watford. Gordon, what did you make of the budget? And whose vision of Britain's the right one? Is Corbyn right, or is the Chancellor right?
Well, I actually believe, and I did write to all these people beforehand because I didn't want anybody to say I was wise with hindsight. They're both
right.
wrong. They're both wrong. Very simply, I have no wish for a free spending Corbyn with tax measures which basically wouldn't repay the debt which he would create. On Hammond's side, the real thing which needed addressing in this budget, I believe, was inequality. To actually just put the personal allowance up by inflation is, quite frankly, too meek, too mild. I warned that I think we needed to be bold and we needed to be brave. We were neither. I personally would have put it up, and this will shock you, to something like £20,000. Now, I know that would cost, and I would have to put the higher rates of tax up to 50% to achieve that. But it's the right direction. I'm afraid that I don't want to have obscenely rich people or greedy people at the same time as having people who have nothing. I don't want to go fine dining while other people are queuing outside of a food bank.
Gordon, I do understand what you're saying about allowances, and by the way, I was campaigning from 2006 onwards, as indeed were the Liberal Democrats, for raising that threshold at which people start paying tax, and indeed I've been saying for years, no tax on the minimum wage, no tax on, it will be about £13,000 a year. But to be fair, Gordon, haven't the government made some pretty big strides in this area since 2010?
They have, if you go back to the £6,000.
Exactly.
But I look at where we are today. History doesn't really concern me. It's the future which worries me. Yep. At the moment, we're looking forward, to 3 years or 4 years of pretty difficult times. Brexit, I believe it's right to come out. I have no questions about that. But I do believe at times it will be difficult. And I do want the country to be unified, and it would help if people actually were a little bit better off as we went through that period.
So we needed more incentives, Gordon, more vision, more incentives for those at the lower end of the pay scale, yeah?
We need to cushion the worst off in our society whilst we go through that difficult phase.
Yeah, fine. Gordon, thank you. You made the point very well, and there have been big advances on this. You know, there are many people in work at the lower end of the pay grade that have got more income than they had a few years ago. Mind you, many of those would argue their rents have gone up considerably as well. Jimbo says, Labour are so dishonest, they like to pretend Brexit isn't happening. They have no chance in reality. Well, Jimbo, I wouldn't be so sure. That all depends on the popularity of the government, or perhaps even, as I said a few days ago, we could face Tory abstentionism if Brexit isn't seen to be delivered. Andrew is really pessimistic on Facebook and says, Brexit will bankrupt Britain. And Nick says to me, they are really quite thick, aren't they? It doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out if you drop the tax on cigarettes, they would have more revenue instead of people buying snide and duty-free. Nick, I'll comment on that in one moment. It's budget day, and Philip Hammond tells us it's an economy that's working for everybody, but Jeremy Corbyn says falling pay, slow growth and rising poverty. And I'm asking which of those visions you believe best reflects Britain. Now, before the break, Nick was talking about tobacco taxes, and Nick was right, particularly when it comes to hand-rolling tobacco. Now, people who are hard up, if they're smokers, will tend to hand-roll cigarettes. They're very much cheaper. Younger people will tend to buy hand-rolling tobacco. One thing that happened very recently was the 12.5 gram packs, or the old 1 ounce packs, were ruled illegal by our friends in the European Union, goodness knows why. But already, because it's so easy to buy pouches of loose tobacco in countries in Europe, countries where tobacco taxes are way lower, Belgium, Portugal, you name it, what has now happened is a huge black market has developed. I've seen estimates that suggest that over 75% of hand-rolling tobacco that is sold in the UK is in fact black tobacco. Not in colour, but it's black market tobacco. It's hooky tobacco. It's, as Nick called it earlier, snide tobacco. And it's available almost everywhere. What has Philip Hammond done today with hand-rolling tobacco taxes? He's decided to put them up by 6%. So well done, Chancellor. There'll be even more smuggled tobacco and even less revenue for you. And interestingly, when I'm asking you, what your vision of the economy is, whether Corbyn's got it right, whether Hammond's got it right, and I guess, by implication, which of these sides do you think could organise things the best for us? What is really interesting is there is a huge intergenerational divide that has opened up over how we perceive Labour or the Conservatives on the economies. So in the polls, both parties are neck and neck. Who would you vote for in the next general election? But a Sky Data poll shows that of 18 to 34-year-olds, 62% want Labour, want Corbyn, in charge of the nation's finances, compared to 28% for the Tories. Interestingly, of those aged over 55, 56% would prefer Theresa May's party running the economy, with Labour trailing back down on 28%. So the young very strongly think that Corbyn's team would do the best job. The older people definitely think May's people would do the best job. I suspect one of the reasons that older people are suspicious of Labour is they remember the 1970s. They were bad days. Britain was doing terribly. And whether that was the fault of Labour policy or the global economy, frankly, isn't the point. Older people are scared of Labour back and running the economy. And I wonder what Burkhan in Sidcup made of today and who he thinks would best run the economy.
Hi, Nigel.
Hello there.
I think personally, Jeremy, let me just break this budget down. So if I owed you £50 and I went to the bank and borrowed £1,000 to pay you back your £50, does that make any sense?
No, not really.
That's what they've done. They've borrowed billions to pay off hardly anything. And they've put us in more debt, but they keep saying they're paying off the budget. And another thing is, this stamp duty thing, I can't afford a home, let alone the stamp duty. Like, what have they've done nothing to talk about building cheaper homes so that we can afford it. He said, no, I'll wipe away the stamp duty. I can't afford the deposit because I'm paying £1,500 a month rent.
Do you know what, Burkhan? I do think taking stamp duty away for first-time buyers is a good thing to do, but I think your point, particularly for people living in London and the South East, where rents are at the highest across the United Kingdom, is that, and unless they've got wealthy parents, very few of them are even in the position to get together the deposit to buy a house. So cutting stamp duty actually helps those who are already on the verge of buying their first property. It does nothing for somebody in your position, Burkhan, and you're there in Sidcup, and everywhere in Greater London is a very expensive place to be. So would you like to see them building cheap housing? Is that what you want?
I want cheaper housing, but the problem is the growth, the market, the forecast. There's no growth. Like, and I'm not being funny, Nigel. I've seen more growth last night when I was watching Bait Station. Like, this guy keeps going on about growth, and I've seen none. Like, he's just lying through this economy thing. He's borrowed more money than any other chancellor.
Do you know what, Burkhan? I'm really pleased you've raised this, because every budget they get up and say, the public finances are in safe hands, we can only have what we can afford, and it's extraordinary, because the truth is that when George Osborne became Chancellor of the Exchequer, Burkhan, our national accumulated debt was £650 billion. It is now £1.7 trillion, and that is in the space of just 7 years. They formed the coalition with Clegg and the Lib Dems with the promise of eradicating that deficit, and in fact they've left us, or they've left future generations, with a huge millstone around their neck. Do you find British politics, Burkhan, sometimes a little bit dishonest?
Very dishonest, I really do. And you know what? Say what you want to say about Jeremy. He's honest, and I know people who vouch for him. And I'll tell you something. That's what happens when you got an historian running the Exchequer. I mean, George Osborne studied history. He didn't even study economics. No wonder he borrowed more money than any other chancellor I've known.
Well,
like the geese know more about Henry VIII than he does about banks.
Burkhan, thank you very much indeed for your call. I get by text. Good evening, Nigel. I like the upbeat feel to this budget, and that Mr. Hammond seems now to be embracing Brexit. Well, he kind of did at the beginning of it. And I was pleased he did not increase tax on petrol, says BB. No, he didn't increase tax on petrol, but he did increase tax on those diesel cars that they all told us we must buy because they're better for the environment. There. Another text says budget. The usual non-event budget forgotten in a week, says D in Kent. D, I don't think we'll even be talking about it by next Monday, would be my view. Personal allowance is the only way since 2006. I'm looking forward to post-Brexit budgets when they have a chance to make a difference for the better. So an acknowledgement there that since 2006, personal allowances have helped people on lower pay, and I do believe they have. John in Bournemouth is my next caller. Is Corbyn right? Is it all doom and gloom?
Corbyn is right, yeah, but there is a halfway house. I'm afraid this country is so divided between the have and the haven't. The have will never admit how bad the haven't is because they never have anything to do with them. I actually will, but I'm working out where I'm going to move after my mother passes away eventually. So I think it'll be Merthyr Tydfil, Stoke-on-Trent, Huddersfield or Newcastle on Tyne. But I think I'd like to stay around here for a while and say I'll just go and take a running jump because Labour are coming. This budget delivers nothing. Just go to diesel cars, Nigel. This programme, how many of these diesel vehicles have they actually removed their filters from? Have a guess. How many of these, you know they have this filter device, you know there's about 350,000 have removed the things supposed to be cleaning them. I actually taste the things. So if a sensible government say, I'm sorry, this is ridiculous, we want diesel cars off the road. And yes, electric cars are the answer, but under Tory world, electric cars equal driverless cars. Then when you start hearing, what's his name on LBC this afternoon, so I forget his name, he's a Tory guy, starts with W. His vision in the future is dreaded. It sounds like 1984, or was it? It doesn't bear thinking about. I'm sorry, these Tories haven't got a clue. I've got a feeling now they're going to pad Brexit out for a bit longer if they can get this budget doesn't deliver anything.
Don't spoil my day, John.
You should seriously, I think you've got a problem about Labour. Forget Tony Blair, he was a Tory. I'm one of the people in this world who never voted for Maggie, partly because there was an election before I was 18, and I never voted for Tony Blair. I'm totally behind Corbyn. I've seen what goes on. I live in Bournemouth. It's very expensive property. People are going around like headless chickens trying to make a living. They haven't even got time to realise they need to go and get a free community meal on a Saturday that I used to run. Because they're so governed to try to keep it. It's chaos, and the people down here with money live a totally alternative lifestyle to everyone else.
John, I agree with that. That the better off have no idea how difficult it is for those who are having a very tough time, and I understand that. And I think Jeremy Corbyn does speak up very passionately for those in the country who are not having a great time, and I agree with that. Whether I think he and John McDonnell would be competent in producing an economy that would lead to increasing tax revenues, more jobs, and more money to help the needy, that's perhaps where I have the problem, because I fear that what would happen under Corbyn is we would head back towards a 1970s style of super taxes, excessive regulation. So that's my concern, John. But let me just come back to one thing you raised. Hammond was saying, we are the party of the future because we're basically going to embrace the concept of driverless cars. What is your concern, John, with driverless cars?
just getting more impersonal. I have problems with LED lighting anyway. I haven't told you about that. LED lighting ruins my life, and no one's got to the bottom of it. I just want taxi drivers to still have a job, Nigel. I don't want Uber. I just want taxi drivers. I want some. Soon we're going to have no reason to contact any neighbours or there's no chance of building a community around here. I actually thought Brexit would give us. When I was outside the polling station, I had no opposition down here, and I was saying vote Leave. I didn't deceive her, and I said we need to get our sovereignty back to sort this country out, and we do, because we just do. But with the situation we know, we've got such a weak government, and this budget just doesn't do anything, and they're just flying by whatever.
John, I thank you. No, I thank you. Lots of points there from John. Lots of passion there from John. He fears driverless cars, again, take us even further away from each other as neighbours and people living in a community. He may be right. Well, of course, on Budget Day, an increase for the NHS in England is something welcomed by some, but it's nowhere near as much as the NHS said they wanted. But a story here that interests me. You see, NHS money is going to be a debate that goes on, frankly, for the foreseeable future. And yet today, the UK Competition and Markets Authority have accused a Canadian drug maker of abusing its position by raising the price of a drug given to the NHS, or bought by the NHS, by 5,500%. Yeah, the drug, litherine, which is used to treat hypothyroidism, which causes depression, tiredness, and weight gain. This drug was costing the NHS, buying it from Canada, in 2006, £4.46 per packet. In 2016, the NHS is still buying this drug, but it's paying £258.19 per packet for this drug. We don't mind more money for the NHS, but we want to know that it's well spent, and we don't want, frankly, to be massively ripped off by some of these giant pharmaceutical industries. And a quick point on Brexit, because Brexit and the budget cannot, I think, be divorced from each other. Very interesting comments yesterday in London from a man that I know, Hans Olaf Henkel. He's an MEP. He was elected on the AFD's list originally. He's not with them anymore. But he's the former head of the Federation of German Industries. That's their equivalent of the CBI. And he says that what Barnier is doing is he's asking Britain to name a price without knowing what we're going to get for it. He's right, isn't he? And he says, as somebody who spent his life in German industry, that Britain should have the best deal possible. And I've been arguing for a year now that we should be lobbying European companies. We should be lobbying European businesses, European trade unions, because there's lots and lots of people in places like Munich, not too far away from where I am right now, who want to go on selling their cars into the UK without having a 10% car tariff put upon them. I don't see any evidence that the government's done that. We're too busy talking to people like Barnier, Juncker and Verhofstadt, who frankly do not want to play ball. Now, lots of comment about Labour and how competent you think they are or are not, and whether Corbyn's vision, a very negative vision today of what life is like in this country for the have-nots, is right. Graham says to me on Facebook, John McDonnell is mad. He was talking about Arthur Scargill earlier. The guy's nuts. Connor says, OK, so the Labour Party want to borrow 500 billion over the next 10 years. And that's the figure that Philip Hammond today was saying. Labour would bankrupt us. They'd ruin us. They'd borrow 500 billion, but Connor is absolutely on the ball when he says that's 50 billion sterling a year, which is the same pretty much as the Conservatives are currently borrowing a year. Yeah, and Connor, that's the lowest level they've borrowed for the last 7 years, and it's a point very well made. Millie is very negative about Labour. She says, Corbyn gets into power, everyone get your life savings out, because Gordon Brown did such a great job with our pensions, didn't he? You're right, Millie. What he did to private pension provision in this country was a complete disaster. Although in terms of incompetence, nowhere near selling 400 metric tons of gold at under $300 an ounce. Adams cheering and saying, Corbyn for PM. And Lynn says, yeah, so JC, Corbyn, he's such an honest guy, isn't he? He's going to pay off all the student debts. And then he cops it out by saying, It was just an aspiration. More comments coming in about Labour, actually, than are coming in about the Conservatives. As many positives as there are negatives. Dave is my next caller from Paignton in South Devon. A new caller to the show. Dave, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. A pleasure to speak to you.
Pleasure to speak to you. So,
now,
are things getting Dave, are things getting a bit better down in Devon, or are they getting worse?
I think it's pretty much as per normal. I wouldn't say it's particularly any better. Now, Nigel, my point is, I see that our economy is being played down on the news, and that's the way I can see that things are going to go in the future. Because, if they keep downplaying our economy, then if we were to actually succeed after Brexit, then surely that is going to spell the end of the EU. And I can just see that our economy is going to be downplayed, whether that's based on factual or fictional figures. I can just see that our economy is actually going to be downplayed all the time now, because otherwise it's just the end of the EU.
There has been a lot of negativity from people who regret the Brexit result, Dave. You're absolutely right. Whether it's the fact the pound's a bit lower or whatever else it may be, it does seem to be a Remain argument, is that, or those that can't accept the Leave vote today, that, you know, you talk down Britain and maybe we're going to rethink where we're going. And you know what, Dave? I contrast this to what I hear in America. Now, you may say that Donald Trump is over the top and wildly optimistic, but when he travels around and speaks at big rallies in former coal mining towns or areas where car manufacture has declined, and 20,000 people turn up in a basketball stadium, and Donald says, it's getting better, it's going to be great, it's going to be huge, and whether it's all fully justified or not, do you know something? If 20,000 people walk out of there feeling better about life, that kind of spreads. And I would like to see, Dave, a little bit more bullish optimism from some of our business leaders and some of our politicians.
Yeah, if only we had someone like him.
Well, Dave, you and I are Trumpites. We're in a minority in this country. He's not particularly well liked, but I tell you what, we talked about growth a couple of times on this show tonight. Growth in America is over 3%. It's going up. Growth in some of the southern states, for example, Georgia, is now running at 4.5%. American growth rates are at a level we have not seen for over half a century in this country. And my feeling, Dave, is American growth rates next year will be even higher than 3% as a mean. Dave from Paignton, I thank you for your call. He wants a bit more optimistic talk, a bit less negativity, and he thinks it's the Remainers talking down the economy, because if Britain does well with Brexit, it's the end of the European Union. Who knows? He's got a point. My next caller is Ben from Walton-on-the-Naze. Ben, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. Thanks for having me on.
Well, not a bit. So tell me, is Philip Hammond right? Are things living there at Walton-on-the-Naze getting better all the time?
Well, as you can imagine, it's not perfect, but compare it to the alternative on the other bench, the Labour opposition. To be quite honest with you, they're sensible at least. You know, Philip Hammond, he might be boring, but we had a couple more jokes, didn't he, today? But
hey, come on, Ben. I mean, he was almost like the bloke in the corner of the local pub, you know, who's got all the best stories.
Yeah, it was a bit more interesting. I don't know what he had today in his coffee, but
well, one of his jokes, Ben, that was a bit lame, is he said, Mr. Speaker, you know, I was tempted to have in my glass that he had in front of him something stronger than water. And I thought that was a bit pathetic, because, I mean, certainly when Norman Lamont was Chancellor, it was a very large gin and tonic that he took into the chamber with him. But no, there was a slightly more human touch to him today. Of that, there's no doubt. But you feel that we're in better hands with him than we would be with Corbyn and McDonnell.
Absolutely. Because basically, I just think, Jeremy Corbyn, John McDonnell, all they are offering, I'm a young person myself, so I'm supposed to be the target audience, but they just offer false hope. They offer nothing but false hope. They never want to make tough decisions. It's all nicey-nicey. They're not responding to a budget. They come out with a Christmas list instead.
Yeah.
It's just a Christmas shopping list, and all it is, they just want to be popular. And the funny thing is, just on one more last point, they want to borrow all this money, as we know. They don't like big banks and corporations. Well, they're going to be borrowing this money from big banks, corporations, shareholders, with rich people, with government bonds. So this is what I don't understand. If they're going to pay more in interest than what the NHS budget is and what the defence budget is. So,
well, not yet. They're not yet paying more in interest than the NHS budget, but they are paying as much in interest as the defence budget, in fact, a little bit more. Listen, I thank you very much indeed, Ben, for your points. And Dan in Edinburgh was quite struck by the Chancellor today. He says, very different side to Hammond today. His charisma put that of Theresa May's to shame. Oh, dear, Dan, do you think it was actually a bit of a leadership bid today? Who's to say? I get a tweet here from someone called Naughty who says, why would you invest £800 million in driverless cars? It doesn't make sense. Just thinking of taxi and lorry drivers. There's approximately 580,000 drivers in these industries, and lost wages would be huge. And you'd be putting them all out of a job. And that, I think, is going to be a big debate over the course of the next few years. It appears that a lot of the big global money wants us to go for driverless cars. And when we get to driverless cars, particularly in our cities, it'll mean that we stop buying cars. Because you want to travel somewhere, you'll press an app on your phone and a driverless car will be outside your door in 2 or 3 minutes and take you to where you want to get to. So there could be huge social implications for driverless cars, but believe me, I do think they're coming because a lot of big money wants that to be the case. Richard in Chelsea makes a very powerful point, very important point, which is the Treasury have approximately 14,000 pages of tax laws and codes. Hammond has done nothing about this utter nonsense. And for people who've got multiple incomes and who can't work out what their tax is, they, of course, all have to employ an accountant, which puts another 2 or 3% of their annual income up, because that's the bill that they've got to pay. Our tax system is massively complicated, and Hammond didn't do a single thing today to change any of that. And I wonder, Walter, you're calling from Blackpool. Whose vision of Britain's the right one? Is it Corbyn's or is it Hammond's?
Well, neither. You see, the thing is, Nigel, that Philip Hammond, like so many of his predecessors, claimed to be the champion of small businesses. Now, there was very little evidence of that in the budget today, and particularly in terms of reducing the administration and bureaucracy burden on small businesses. This was a golden opportunity to get rid of one of the most unwanted legacies of the Osborne years, which is the quarterly VAT returns. Now, this is imposing a huge administrative and accounting burden on small businesses. Now, I'm not personally concerned with it because my turnover, quite frankly, comes nowhere near the VAT threshold.
Yeah.
But certainly many businesses, small businesses here in Blackpool, are feeling the impact of this totally unnecessary move, which can only be to the detriment of small businesses throughout the country. Now, I think
Walter, just one point on this. And by the way, I agree with your sentiments. I don't think successive governments have understood small businesses. They mouth off about small businesses at budgets and at elections and do nothing. And one of the reasons, Walter, of course, is that most of the legislation affecting small businesses has been part of the EU and they haven't been able to change it. But just to be on one point on VAT, the Chancellor did say, in one of his economic-y, as he called it, bits of the speech, he did say that the threshold for companies paying VAT was £85,000 a year, that was a lot higher than it was with many of our European neighbours, and there'd been great pressure on him to reduce that threshold, but that it would stay at that level for the next 2 years. So just to be fair, he did say that.
Yeah, but the thing is, I think that post-Brexit we have a great opportunity to lighten the burden of bureaucracy on small businesses, particularly VAT. Now, VAT, to my mind, is a very obnoxious tax. and post-Brexit we could get rid of it. In fact, what I would like to see is to replace VAT, corporation tax, business rates by one simple turnover tax, payable twice a year, with free software issued to every business, so that they can cut out a lot of the administration, a lot of the accountancy fees.
Walter, you're right, and you know, I know myself that if you're late with a VAT return, and it could be for very good reason, you're travelling, you're on business or whatever, if you're late by a day or two with your VAT, I mean, the threats you get, you think you sort of committed murder or something. So there is a huge burden on small businesses, Walter, with this. I think that this is a debate, not for now, but as Brexit approaches, Walter, I think, and we'll certainly do it on this show, there needs to be a debate, because we only got VAT because we joined the common market. There is a chance to get rid of it and help millions. And Walter, I thank you very much for your call. Simon on Facebook feels very much the same way on driverless cars as our tweeter earlier. Driverless cars and trucks will put millions out of work. Why are we pushing for such high unemployment? Well, Simon, I guess the counter-argument is that whether it's the print unions or people working on production lines, that you do get these big technological changes, and unfortunately, people get put out of work. The other question that was asked was, would driverless cars make the country a better place to live, or would it diminish our sense of community? And what Hammond was trying to do today was to say, we are the party of modernity. We are the party that is looking forward. The other party are looking backwards. And it may well be that Hammond is looking forwards, or is he just playing into the hands of the absolute mega, giant multinationals who would like to control that market and quite a fair chunk of our lives? Jamie is calling me from Manchester, a new caller to the show. Jamie, what did you make of today?
You know what, Nigel? First of all, thanks for having me on. I'm a bit of an anomaly, really. I'm 24 years old, turning 25, and shock horror, I'm a Conservative voter. I'm also a Brexiteer, and I thought that
This is not a confessional, Jamie, but go on, please.
It's Conservatives Anonymous Hour. I thought that the budget was fantastic. I'm just about to sign for my first house. I've been saving up ever since I was a young lad. The whole plan was, every bit of birthday money, save it, don't spend, get enough together for a deposit.
Well done, you.
Yeah, absolutely, but, I'm not like everyone. I knew I had a plan and I wanted to do it. Getting rid of stamp duty for me, it's more than a week's wages. I'm a working man. It's more than a week's wages. When you're looking to buy a house, you should budget in stamp duty on top. So I don't understand these people saying, it doesn't matter at all. It doesn't matter at all. Of course it does. In my case, it's £500 to £700, which is saved and can be put towards furnishings. It can be put towards a holiday.
So Jamie, you are an example of a big winner from this budget, and I commend you for working and saving and being in that position, and it's great news for you, and you're exactly the target audience that the Chancellor was aiming at. The trouble, if I'm being a bit cynical about you, is that the Chancellor already had you as a voter, didn't he?
No, he did, absolutely, but, the alternative is, and again, I look at this from a business point of view, the alternative is higher taxes, which means less employment, because ultimately employers won't be able to afford to hire new people. Production will go down, employment goes down. The alternative is unthinkable.
Okay, fine. Listen, well done. Congratulations, Jamie, a happy budgeteer. He'll be celebrating tonight. Jamie in Lampeter says, the Chancellor of the Exchequer must let the House of Commons have a vote on the amount Britain is going to pay the EU. Well, let's see whether they do that. Why doesn't Philip Hammond just clearly say that Britain can't afford to pay the EU 40 billion euros? Well, it'll be 38 billion pounds. Once we vote to leave, it'll all have to be borrowed. It will go onto the budget deficit and cost hundreds of millions a year in interest. Powerful point. I've got time for one last call. It'll be a quickie. He's a new caller to the show. It's Joseph in Bournemouth. Good evening, Joseph.
Good evening, Nigel.
So what's your impression of the budget? Is Corbyn's vision right or Hammond's?
Well, I would go for Hammond's personally, anything but Corbyn.
Right. So you think he'd make a right mess of it, do you?
Yeah, I think so, personally.
And yet there are millions out there, Joseph, many millions out there, particularly young people, who feel that Corbyn is the only one authentically standing up and speaking for them?
Well, I personally don't agree with that today. I think that the stamp duty, like the previous caller, I think that was a really good decision, especially for young voters. And I think that's the kind of thing that should be attracting people and not, sort of handouts and things like that.
Okay. So, I mean, Joseph, I'm afraid time is an enemy, but I wanted to get you on as a new caller, albeit briefly. But what would you give? And you're a supporter, but marks out of 10 for Hammond today.
Personally, because it's a big goal of mine, I'd probably say 10 out of 10.
Fine. Brilliant. Joseph, thank you so much for your call. And interesting, wasn't it? Some young callers there, trying to get on the housing ladder, who think this has been a great budget. And for them, it has been a great budget. Overall, I would say, I did think his tone was a lot better today, particularly about the European Union. But the rest of it, truly forgettable. It won't make a very big difference to that many people. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show.